Hi there, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for a special interview session introducing AgilePM for Scrum, an exciting new framework from the Agile Business Consortium, which combines the best of two leading frameworks in the Agile world. That's AgilePM and Scrum. My name's Mark Constable. I'll be your host and moderator for this session, and it's a pleasure to be joined by APMG CEO Richard Pharro and Andrew Craddock, who's the product architecture lead at the Agile Business Consortium. So Richard will be posing some key questions to Andrew, which we hope will generate some good insight into what the new framework encompasses, why it was developed, and who stands to benefit most from the framework. Before we get going with the interview, bear with me a few more moments as I cover a little housekeeping. So the first point to note is the session is being recorded, and everyone that's registered will receive a follow-up email once the recording is available. Secondly, you're welcome to submit questions, and indeed we'd very much encourage you to submit questions at any time, so that the interview should last for about 25 to 30 minutes, so we'll have at least 10 to 15 minutes for questions after that. So do get your questions in via the GoToWebinar control panel. I'll be keeping a close eye on those throughout. Something that isn't on the screen there, but something quite important: if you've dialed into the session using the phone, I'd request or politely ask that you switch to the computer audio option or voice or VoIP option, as there's a large video element to this session. You won't hear the audio of that video if you're dialed in on the phone, so that's quite easy to change on the GoToWebinar control panel. And last but not least, we value feedback on these sessions. So in terms of the content or the way in which it's delivered and organised, any feedback is very important to us. So I think that's everything. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Richard and Andrew to get started with the interview, and starting with Richard. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. My name is Richard Pharro. I'm the CEO of APM Group, and I've been working with the Agile Business Consortium, I think, for about 12 or 15 years, when they launched AgilePM. So I'm delighted today to be talking to Andrew Craddock, who's been around Agile longer than I have. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Richard. Thank you. Yeah, and it has been 15 years. You were right first time. So, or in that, yeah, that's when we started working with APMG on Agile PM. So I am the product architecture lead at the Agile Business Consortium. So I'm responsible for making sure that all the products that we have fit together and evolve in the right way to meet the needs of the Agile community moving forward.
But tell me, Andrew, Agile project management, Scrum, this stuff goes back a long time, doesn't it? If I'm right, the Agile manifesto was 2001, but didn't Scrum teams exist before the Agile manifesto? Weren't Scrum teams around developing projects and products way before someone called it Agile, or have I got that wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. So the agile movement with that label really started in 2001 with a group of thought leaders getting together to share their knowledge and experience of working in what back then were completely new ways in the sphere of IT projects and software development. Scrum had been around for 6-7 years prior to that, and so had DSDM actually, which was the sort of the founding principles and practices and everything behind Agile PM. So both Agile PM and Scrum have their heritage going back to the 90s. In fact, Scrum goes back even further, but probably not in a form that we would recognise today.
So when these came about, where did the concept of business value fit? Because if I understand it correctly, Scrum teams were all about iteration, rapid development, doing a little bit, and iterating as they went and releasing features as they came. But did they ever have an overall plan? Was there a grand plan about the business value that product would be delivering?
Yeah, and again, that's a really interesting question. So, Scrum really, from the outset, was focused primarily on building software. So that's what Scrum was about in particularly in the early days. It's broadened and diversified since then, as a lot of agile sort of wisdom has into the more general business world. But certainly from the outset, what Scrum was focused on was really delivering a valuable software product, and that's really what it set out to do. So it wasn't looking necessarily at business value; it was looking at a product that had value, that was valuable. DSDM, Agile PM, had a slightly different perspective. It was looking more at the overall solution that you get from a project approach. So looking to say, yeah, okay, software is likely to be a component, for example, of a business change initiative. So it's not just about building a system that people can use within a business. You also need to do all the other things to understand what value that has and how it's going to be implemented and deployed within the business, how people are going to be trained to use the software, and all those sorts of things, which is a sort of more holistic view around business value overall.
So, but what I don't understand is if these two things have been happily living side by side for the last 15 to 20 years, so we've had Agile PM and we've had Scrum, what was the business driver for the Agile Business Consortium to ask you to write, Agile PM for Scrum? What need are you trying to satisfy with it? Why are you doing it? Why are we doing it?
I think so. It's a really good. That's another really good question. It's great, these really good questions. I think I'd correct you when you said these approaches have lived happily with each other. Certainly, that wasn't the case early on. We had the, sort of method framework wars and all this sort of thing, and we were in the DSDM is better than Scrum. No, Scrum is better than DSDM type nonsense, and when the reality is they all had different things to bring to the party. The other thing that is true is of those two approaches is they had different business models from the outset. So from the outset, Scrum's business model, the creators of Scrum were keen to take Scrum to the widest possible audience that they could and get people using it. Agile PM came from a closed shop consortium. So it was a group of large organizations back in the early 90s who got together, created DSDM, and it was a bit of a club. And if you wanted to use DSDM, you're welcome to join the club. But if you didn't join the club, you couldn't even see it. You might have heard a rumor about it, but you couldn't see what it was. So that led to Scrum really sort of taking off in the wider world, while DSDM became a very good secret. Now, back in 2007, the consortium changed its business model and said, right, let's move away from the closed shop. Let's make DSDM free to view and free to use. And that coincided with the conversations with you, Richard, in terms of, okay, well, if that's happening, then how about some, can we have the project management perspective on that? And that's really where that, the concept of that product was born. So we now had two products that were out there, free to view, free to use. And the opportunity for both to exist. They were still, however, addressing things in different ways. So Scrum was still focused on its product development. Agile PM was focused on the wider picture, but also had its own version of Scrum built into it. And so using the two together was never an easy thing. So what we've done with Agile PM for Scrum is to overcome that sort of conflict that existed and said, look, what Scrum does down at the team level, building products and building services in a collaborative team way is brilliant. It just is. So although you didn't want to get into the debate of which is better, which isn't, one thing that is absolutely clear is that Scrum, the global phenomenon, is the approach that everybody uses. So we thought, okay, that's absolutely fine. It is great at what it does, but how about the things it doesn't do? And those are the sort of project management type things. So that's really where the demand came from, and it came from people who were saying, well, I like projects, but Scrum doesn't do projects, and got Scrum, so how do we bring the two together? And we've got people who are using AgilePM saying, oh, it's a real pain because we've got all these people that know and understand Scrum, and it's a completely different set of language and names for things that you use in DSDM. So we thought, do you know what? Let's just bring them together. Let's embrace Scrum for what it is, and let's add the value that PM brings to that party around the edge.
So, Andrew, do you think the hatchets have been buried? Do you think these two tribes, the Agile PM tribe and the Scrum tribe, are going to be able to work well together when they see Agile PM for Scrum?
I don't know is the honest answer. I think one of the things the Agile Business Consortium has done is to be absolutely explicit that we are representing the whole of agility and business agility professionals now. It's not about our product as opposed to somebody else's product. It's about the greater application and advancing business agility worldwide. That's what we're here to do. So from the point of view of if there are any hatchets still around, we've put ours away. We're not interested in using that in a competitive way to say what's better or what's worse or whatever. So from that point of view, I think the one hatchet is buried. As for the other hatchet, it's certainly not being wielded that we can see. I think there really is a recognition that agility as a concept goes beyond a framework. And I think if you look at the Scrum Guide says this is what Scrum is. You're welcome to take it and use it how you wish, to extend it how you wish, and so on. So we've rather taken that to heart and said, fine, let's leave Scrum in our new AgilePM for Scrum product. Let's leave Scrum as pure as we can, and let's just layer on the value around the outside that the project brings.
And when you took that approach, sorry, Andrew, when you took that approach, was that easy? I mean, did you find that you could mesh them or meld them together so that it comes across as a single coordinated approach to delivering projects, or are there still some joins there where it doesn't quite fit? Having spent the last few months of your life sort of labouring over this, are you really happy with the results, or are you marginally happy with the results of what you've been able to achieve?
I'm really happy with the results, and to be honest, it was once we'd made the fundamental connection that we wanted to leave Scrum as true to the Scrum Guide as we could, it became relatively easy. So we've taken the Scrum Guide. We've reproduced the Scrum Guide in the handbook that we have for AgilePM for Scrum, and we've made one change. And that one change is that what the Scrum Guide refers to as an increment, which is what a number of which is what the Scrum team delivers during a Scrum sprint. We've just put the word product in front of it. So we said that's a product increment. And the only reason we did that is because projects themselves have increments which are different, and we wanted to be able to differentiate between a product increment delivered by a Scrum team and a project increment managed by the organization that the Scrum teams exist within. So that's the one change we made to Scrum, and everything else we found a way of layering in around the outside. And to give you an example, and it's an important example, in the world of pure Scrum, the product owner is the one individual, not a committee and all these things. The Scrum Guide is very explicit. The one individual that provides the direction that a Scrum team needs to build its product. There's also something in the Scrum Guide that says, and it's up to the product owner to manage the interests of stakeholders. And what we've done is we've said in a project context, there is going to be a business visionary who is the visionary for the overall business change and the overall business value. There is a solution architect who is responsible for the overall solution, not just the software, but perhaps the hardware the software runs on, the business change that needs to be rolled out associated with it. And we have a project manager whose responsibility is making sure that projects are delivered on time, on budget, and those sort of good things, and dependencies are managed between teams and so on. So we've said those are the primary stakeholders that the product owner needs to deal with in a project context. The product owner is still exclusively responsible for shaping the product backlog and things like that. They just need to be taking into consideration the needs of the business visionary, the project manager, and the solution architect. So if a project manager says this feature of software needs to be delivered in this sprint by team A because the team B, who's also working in a Scrum way, needs that in order to do something they want to do in the next sprint, that's just one of the considerations in the ordering and refinement of the product backlog. So that's, once we did that, once we made that sort of connection, it was really easy actually to build one thing on top of another.
Andrew, that's very interesting, but you're still talking about software development projects and work of that ilk. So is AgilePM for Scrum suitable for other projects? I don't know if you spend many hours following the LinkedIn war between is it agile or is it a waterfall project, but there is a view that all projects are to a certain degree agile. So if you had this concept of AgilePM for Scrum, could you see it being applied to a physical project, like, say, a construction project where there could be a number of teams involved in the early stage of the project doing the design, possibly working as Scrum teams, possibly doing product iteration in terms of the design of the scheme, and then moving on to the traditional delivery of a physical product? I mean, can you envisage that happening in terms of the combined Agile PM for Scrum, or do you think it's always going to be, if you like, softer business projects rather than? I know you've been involved in the design and oversight of having a new house built for yourself, and could you see the Agile PM for Scrum being done for your physical project? Would it have worked?
Do you know what? I'm not sure. I'm not sure it would have worked. To be perfectly honest, there are so many external influences that impact something like a physical build of a house. You just cannot get up on a roof laying roof tiles if there's a force 8 gale going on. And it's and with the best will in the world, unlike the sort of ethos of a Scrum team, I didn't participate in the build process, but if I was part of the team, and I kind of was, as almost like the product owner, laying roofing, putting a roof on a building is a different skill set to building the walls of a building, and that's a different skill set to putting all the plumbing in place. If somebody was able to do all of that, then that's unusual. Yeah. So the idea of a Scrum team being involved in the development, the actual physical construction of the house, is difficult to envisage. But certainly from the design and all of that sort of thing, we we weren't a Scrum team. We didn't organise ourselves as a Scrum team, but there was definitely a collaborative elements of collaborative effort between product owners ourselves who wanted the product at the end of the day, the architect who was responsible for coming up with all the relevant designs and all of that sort of thing to meet our need, the builder who was going to be leading the implementation of those things. We did work in a very collaborative, scrummy type way. We didn't, however, have a 2-week sprint in which all of this stuff got done. So, but concepts apply, and I think that's to go back to the beginning of the question you had about is this really all still going to be about software and things like that? I don't think so, and the reason I don't think so is because the application of Scrum itself has moved a long way beyond just software. There are Scrums in business teams all over the place using it. One of the ladies we had working with us on marketing within the Agile Business Consortium is very used to using Scrum in a pure marketing context where there is no software, and what they're building, the products they're building, are completely different to a software type product. So I think there's a bit of a stretch to say we can use Scrum for building a bridge or a house. We can certainly use bits of it and elements of agility in that. But as an overall project process, I think we're still going to be sort of away from the sort of fully physical environment with the use of Scrum. However, the agile project management, the agile project management bits, I think, would be more easy to apply to a physical build.
But you could see it then being applied to an organisational change project.
Yes. In fact, I've seen it done. I've done it even in not necessarily using Scrum, but using DSDM, using AgilePM in that context. And certainly, we were working with the concept of making incremental changes, working in the duration of a sprint. Typically, they were 4 weeks, so a bit longer than a sprint would normally be these days. But certainly, sort of working to deliver a set of outputs, set of products, increments, if you like, during a sprint that would build us towards the overall business objective of an organisational change.
There's never a clear definition of how long a sprint should be. So, based on your experience, how do you determine whether a sprint should be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or even longer?
I think that's probably dictated by the pace you can implement change in what you're doing. So for software projects, sprints are typically 2 weeks. Most people sort of center around that sort of time frame, and that's because in 2 weeks you can meaningfully get a group of people together to create something of tangible value. It works with that sort of cadence. In some sort of applications, though, 2 weeks is an eternity. Yeah, and there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't run almost a sprint in a day if what you were working on required that degree of dynamism in terms of delivery. And for projects that were longer, 6 weeks maybe a sort of top end. What was interesting when I was trained by Ken Schwaber, one of the co-creators of Scrum, back in the early 2000s, it was a calendar month. That's how long a sprint was. And there was no variation. A sprint was a calendar month, and that was kind of fine back in 2001 or 2002, whenever that was. But these days, it's very, very rare that somebody would have a sprint that long.
And I suppose that is the nice thing about it, isn't it? Over the last 20 years or so, you've had that incremental innovation and development. But to start with, doing work in a calendar month must have been an outrageous proposal for some organisations that you're going to get it all done in a month.
Yes, indeed.
But since then, as people become more comfortable with it, then it's evolved as all things should. I mean, I had a strange conversation with someone the other day who said their sprints are 12 weeks because they don't want to waste time on the planning at the outset of a sprint. I don't know what you think about that.
I kind of understand where the sentiment comes from. We're using Scrum internally at the Agile Business Consortium, and we moved from 2-week sprints to 3-week sprints, largely for that reason, actually. And what we found is that we weren't delivering sufficient tangible value in 2 weeks, and we still had the overhead of things like the sprint planning event, the review, the retrospective, and that sort of thing. And we just decided to experiment. This just feels like a lot of overhead for what we're actually producing. Let's try 3 weeks, and we shifted to 3 weeks, and that just felt much better. So we're doing sufficient planning, the right amount of planning for the amount of work we were doing. The duration was right for the cadence was right for the sort of work we were doing. So yeah, it really does depend. I would struggle with 12 weeks as 3 months, a quarter of a year between any serious review and planning of what you're doing seems too long to me. I would struggle to think of anything apart from the most stable of things in the most stable of environments where change just wasn't an issue, to accept that 12 weeks was sensible.
I think you're spot on, because I never saw much delivery coming out from what they were doing. So you might have that spot on. So before we wrap up and open the floor to questions, Andrew, what would success look like for you in terms of Agile PM for Scrum? What would if we roll ourselves forward to the end of this year, 11, 12 months from now, what would you like to see?
I think what I'd like to see is people starting to realise that the value that a project framework can bring to an agile environment. So an awful lot of people have supposedly moved to using Scrum. I've spoken to so many Scrum masters in larger organizations who used to be project managers, and now they're Scrum masters. And you have a conversation with them and say, well, what are you doing differently, to what you were doing before? And the answer is not much, really. It's so you look at it and think, interesting. So what sort of Scrum master is that project manager likely to be? Is that project manager still organising the work of his or her team in the way that they've done before, rather than following the Scrum precepts of self-organisation within teams and things like that? And kind of the idea that we don't need to worry about all this stuff around the edge. There is only the development of the product. And if there is only development of a product, yeah, Scrum's brilliant. I said that. It does it very well. It's the other things that need coordinating around the edge. And I think if people recognise that those other things can be done in a way that's just as agile as the product development in Scrum, that for me is the key. And I think those people who are using Scrum in their organisation but need that level of project management, moving to adopting Agile PM for Scrum, which brings those two things together. That for me is what success looks like. And the more people do that, the more we shall see people going through training and examinations and building their competence in that combination.
Andrew, thank you very much. We could probably go on for another half an hour, but we are supposed to open the floor to questions. So, yeah, thank you very much for your insights and the background to Agile PM for Scrum. I'd like to hand over back to Mark. So, for Mark, would you like to pick it up and see if we have any questions? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Richard and Andrew. Very good stuff. Got quite a few questions coming in, so we'll start with first one's around scaling Scrum. How does AgilePM for Scrum relate to less and/or Nexus? That's probably more for Andrew.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Thank you.
Happy to leave it to you if you like, Richard. Both Less and Nexus, as I understand them, are still very much focused around product development. It's about scaling product development. So what we've done with AgilePM for Scrum is, as I was explaining earlier, we've broadened it beyond pure product development to look at the bigger picture of delivering an overall solution, which might include not only a product being developed, but for example, whatever's needed to market it, whatever's needed to embed it in live use and leverage the value that the product may have. So that's one element that we've added, which isn't related to scaling, but is related to more than just product development covered by Scrum. And the other thing is, as I mentioned in the last section, in response to the last question, is we've built on the notion of multiple teams. So there's mechanisms in place in AgilePM for Scrum that specifically allow us to deal with multiple teams. So if you wanted to scale your development to half a dozen Scrum teams, for example, that would work very nicely in an AgilePM for Scrum framework.
Great, thanks, Andrew. To what extent can AgilePM for Scrum be applied in large-scale engineering, procurement, and construction projects?
Now that's something that's been raised. I think if you follow one of the guys that's quite active on LinkedIn, Adrian Dooley, who has this argument going, is that there's no such thing as an agile project and there's no such thing as a waterfall project. They're all hybrid projects. His argument is that in the early stages of a construction project, where the team are coming together, the development team are coming together, then you are actually running that in an iterative process using team-based approaches. And in that area, then the whole concept of a Scrum team and iterative development works very, very well. Clearly, when you get to the stage where you're either going to build an aeroplane or a factory or a bridge, then there is certain things that you have to do in series in order to do it. But clearly, I think the iteration in that is, the team learning from previous projects or the team learning from what they've done before. And of course, if you think about it on a housing estate, if you're going to build 100 houses, you tend to build one part of that estate to start with, and you get those houses ready for sale and you sell those, and then you go on to build the rest of the estate. But I think if you split it down into, I can't remember what Andrew called it, but if you split it down into design and development and then say execution, I think design and development is done in a very agile way these days, whereas the execution may be done in a more traditional way. But the problem is you have two tribes, there's the agilists and there's the waterfallers and what have you, and they don't seem to respect each other. But the reality is I think most things are in the middle. Andrew, would you agree with that?
I think I would. I think that's quite well put. One of the key things that really determines how agile you can be in that team on that team basis is to do with skills. The agile approaches assume a sort of a homogeneous skill set amongst all of those in the team, in the development team, really. So, that again applies itself well to collaborative working and that sort of thing. If you're building a house in your housing estate, you'll probably find that the people that lay the bricks have a different skill set to the people that put the roofs on. So chances are they'll have, brickies, and they'll have roofers, and they'll have plumbers, and they'll have electricians, and all of those groups can work together and to have 2 or 3 roofers on a roof at any one time, perhaps. But you wouldn't have brickies up there or an electrician trying to lay roofing tiles. Yep. So separation of skills tends to push you down a route that might not be considered agile, but hey, it's probably the most efficient way of doing it. So why not do it the way that's most efficient?
Good point.
Thanks, guys. Someone's put a question, Andrew. They've got your AgilePM for Scrum pocketbook from a few years ago. So just leads on with that. What is the main difference with this initiative? I guess it's building on that.
It does build on it. So we've moved the Agile PM element of what was described in the pocketbook along a little bit further. Some of the concepts that you'll have read in that pocketbook have been carried forward. So, for example, the notion that for a product owner whose responsibility it is to shape a product backlog for a Scrum team to work on, that is pure Scrum, that's carried through. And in the pocketbook, we talked about how the stakeholders for the product owner are the project level roles in Agile PM, and that concept it has carried through into the new Agile PM Scrum product. But we have pushed pushed Agile PM a little bit further than it was in the pocketbook.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And the next one's about Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFe for short. So how does this differ from SAFe?
So SAFe again is a bit like less and more and things like that. Is focused primarily around product development. So SAFe is about scaling software development primarily. That's where it came from, and again, is what it's very good at. I understand that there are elements in SAFe that do deal more with overall solutions and business value now, but again, it is focused on this concept of product rather than project, and certainly a lot of corporates still use a project type framework. So that's where Agile PM adds value, where you're looking at projects as a concept.
So could Agile PM with Scrum sort of replace SAFe where people are using SAFe, or would they be compatible, or work alongside each other?
So I think where SAFe is used at its best, and where it's sold properly and employed correctly, Agile PM wouldn't go there. So I worked for a number of years ago with Nokia when they were using what was actually a forerunner of SAFe. They had over 1,000 software engineers working on each release of their smartphone. Agile PM for Scrum would not scale to 1,000 software engineers. It would stretch it beyond the point it could cope. However, I've also seen SAFe sold to a company that had a total of 12 people in its IT department. And you look at that and say, well, hang on a minute, where's the scaling in that? There are 12 people that do everything, right? Including, and literally in this case, including supporting the photocopiers in the business. So it really depends on how SAFe is sold and how it's employed.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. So someone here has recently qualified in Agile PM, and they asked, does the new product invalidate my qualification in any way?
Absolutely not. The fundamental thing that if you were to compare the two, you will find some enhancements, particularly in that area I described around planning and around the post-deployment phase instead of a post-project phase. Most of the rest of the life cycle is exactly as it was. We've tweaked a couple of role names. So what in Agile PM version 2 is described as the technical coordinator, we call them the solution architect now. The responsibilities haven't changed. The name has been tweaked a little bit. No, everything that you will have learnt with Agile PM will work just fine. If, however, what you find in your organization or a project you start to manage is that everybody is speaking Scrum language, then you might be better having a look at AgilePM for Scrum, or even the pocketbook, just to sort of understand how you can avoid the arguments about whether we're talking a time box or a sprint here. Yeah, so you might find some added value, but definitely doesn't invalidate what you've done.
Thanks, Andrew. That kind of leads quite nicely onto a sort of question in a similar vein from the training community. So if you provide AgilePM training, are you suggesting AgilePM for Scrum as a replacement, or how would you say the benefits of one over the other?
I think it really does depend on whether the target audience down at the development level is using Scrum. If they are, then I would say the right product is AgilePM for Scrum. If they're not, then AgilePM for Scrum or AgilePM would be equally valuable.
I think it probably comes back, Mark, to a phrase or word that Andrew used earlier. That was the mind shift necessary when Scrum arrived. I think there's a lot of people would say that they work on projects, they work on physical projects, so Scrum doesn't work for them. And those organizations would stick with AgilePM. There's other organizations are looking at it, possibly saying we do a batch of physical projects and we do some development projects. Let's have a look at AgilePM for Scrum. But certainly, I don't think anyone is thinking that AgilePM for Scrum will replace AgilePM. They work alongside each other because they are addressing different audiences, and it gives people that choice. And I suppose what AgilePM for Scrum does is says, if you are using Scrum teams and project managers, here is an integrated approach that may allow you to get the best out of both worlds of those two communities within your organization. But I think if you're delivering projects, then AgilePM is a very, very good way to go. And if you're a development team, then standalone Scrum is a very good way to go. But I think it really depends on the organization's portfolio of development activities and where AgilePM for Scrum would fit.
Thanks, guys. There's a couple of questions around roles and the sort of conflicts of roles between the two frameworks. It's probably best summed up with this question. So our organisation has already created a delivery framework that merges AgilePM and Scrum. Shame that AgilePM for Scrum wasn't available then. One challenge we faced was merging the roles, as Scrum doesn't have PMs and BAs, and AgilePM doesn't have product owners. So how do you reconcile this?
By having both, actually, is the answer. So we have our product owners focusing very much on the development of the product, and we have our project managers focusing very much on the sort of organization of the wider picture. So for a Scrum team, there is absolutely, there's absolutely no difference between whether we have the AgilePM element or we don't. As from a Scrum team's perspective, they have their product owner, they have their Scrum master, and they get on with what it is that's been shaped in the product backlog by the product owner. The product owner interfaces with the rest of the organization. So, for example, we have the concept of a business visionary in AgilePM. So this is the person who is looking at the wider business value, not just the value that comes from the product, the wider business value. We have a solution architect that looks after how all of the things associated with delivery of value link together. So in a classic software project, not just the software product, but if it's in the context of a business change, for example, how the business processes are going to change, how that's going to be implemented, all the HR implications associated with that, all the training of staff, all of those things are classic project stuff. So we have our solution architect making sure that those things hang together. And of course, we have our project manager who is looking at the classic on time, on budget stuff, and managing the people in the environment around the Scrum, self-organizing Scrum team. So that's how we've dealt with it. There is no conflict, unlike where I see some organizations saying they've adopted Scrum and they've just called all their project managers Scrum masters. And if you're not careful, you find out that actually they're just project managers still. They're still telling the team what to do and how to do it in the old way they used to. They're just doing it in 2-week chunks now. So it's, yeah, we've got the blend of the two that allows the full autonomy associated with Scrum and the bigger picture coordinated by the project.
Thanks, Andrew. Question around roles. What roles do you envisage being the primary target audience for AgilePM for Scrums, whether that's the framework itself or training and certification?
So that's an interesting one, and I think you need to look at the suite of products that we have available. So we have the ABC Scrum Master and the ABC Product Owner trainings available and certifications available through APMG and the APMG ATOs. That's suited to those roles and making sure that those roles work properly in the context of Scrum. I would say that Scrum Masters and Product Owners would also benefit from the AgilePM for Scrum training as well, just so they understand, and two things. One is they understand the project context, and B, they can make sure that what they know and have learnt about Scrum is not compromised by that sort of project construct as well. So I think I would say the target audience for AgilePM for Scrum would be product owners and Scrum Masters, project managers, and those leads in project leads in the business, like the business visionary and the solution architect.
Thanks, Andrew. I think we'll finish with two remaining questions. So, ultimate question: have structured time boxes been removed from AgilePM for Scrum?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. The answer is almost. So what we've done is we have the sprint, which is kind of like a free format time box in old Agile PM language. The one thing we've done is kept the concept of the consolidation period. Yeah, so we haven't got the full structured time box. We've got the concept of a consolidation period, and we've identified in that sort of 20% before the end of a sprint, the notion of a consolidation scrum. So this is instead of the daily scrum on that day, you have a consolidation scrum, which would be about 30 minutes instead of 15 minutes. And that's an opportunity for the team to focus on, okay, what are we actually going to get done in the last couple of days of our sprint? The reason we've done that is to allow the information from that consolidation scrum to be fed upwards into a project planning event. So this is how we end up being able to work across multiple teams and that sort of thing, is by the product owners bringing from their teams to this project planning event. We have great confidence we will be at this point in 2 days' time at the end of our sprint. And for the work at the project level to help shape the coordination and influence the product backlogs, feeding into the sprint planning 2 days later to make sure that a project hangs together and multiple teams hang together in the delivery of an overall solution. So almost, we've kept the consolidation phase.
Right, thanks, Andrew. And a good question to finalise on. I'm already familiar with and use AgilePM. So what does the new framework offer above and beyond AgilePM?
So I think it is a good final question, because I think it sort of summarises the reason for the product. And if your project teams, the teams within your project, are familiar with Scrum and use Scrum language and everything else, or indeed if you're new to projects and you discover that's what is in your organization, then I think that's where the value is primarily added. It is about how you make those two frameworks work together. If you don't have Scrum influence within your organization, then the little bit of value add that you will get is from those small steps forward we've made with the Agile PM framework around, as I discussed, the notion of multiple teams, and also the idea of that work that needs to continue post deployment. We've emphasised that a little bit more, but certainly nothing huge unless you're using Scrum at the delivery level.
Great, well, thanks very much, guys. So I think that brings us towards the end. So I'll just cycle through a few slides here. So obviously, an obvious question is when the framework is officially launched and available. And I understand it's the latest date, isn't it, Andrew? 1st of March.
Yes, indeed. We're just going through focusing our content into Kindle format. It's proving to be a little bit more technically difficult than we envisaged, and we've got a target of 1st of March at the latest. I would hope it would be closer to early February that we would have that available. It's likely to take a couple of weeks or whatever after that to have the print edition ready, because of course that's got to go through the typesetting and printing process. But the material is all there now, so it's available to trainers and training organizations in a PDF form, and will be available to the general public in digital form through Amazon as soon as we can get it there, and absolutely at the latest by the 1st of March.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. And yeah, so watch your space, and we'll having registered for the webinar today, we'll make sure we shall follow up as soon as it is available. And just a note that you can see on the screen there, the handbook itself will underpin training and certification, which brings us nicely on to the next slide, which will be available alongside once the handbook is launched. So we'll have training providers in place ready to serve any training requirements, and it will be a foundation level initially for AgilePM for Scrum. So that's what courses and certification will be available, and you'll typically see a 2 to 3 day course duration. So, and as I said on the previous slide, we'll send a follow up to everyone that's registered once those are officially available. So I think that brings us to a close. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you for joining us, and thank you very much to Andrew and Richard for your time, your explanations, and the Q&A today. That's given everybody a good introduction to the new framework, and whetted your appetite a little. So thanks very much, everyone, and we hope to see you on future APMG events in the near future. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks very much, Mark. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.